Job growth is our #1 priority in Ohio, and infrastructure is critical to that economic development. There's a new public works bill making its way through the State House, and we talk with the sponsor of that legislation today, State Senator Kevin Bacon, in today's Caucus Conversation. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about the Public Works Bill.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, John. I always appreciate the opportunity to let Ohioans know what we're doing down here at the State House. The Public Works Project, or resolution, it's a very important piece of legislation we're working on. This is the third time in the state's history that we seek to reauthorize it. And what it is, it would create about $1.9 billion in assets for local government over the course of about 10 years. And the funds would be utilized, badly needed resources for things like sewage, infrastructure, roadway, things that oftentimes aren't glamorous. The taxpayer sometimes doesn't even know that it needs repaired, but nonetheless, things that have to be done to keep our local government maintained and keep things running properly. So we have many communities that are in need of assistance right now, and this is a good way to help them out.
How do these projects get doled out? Is that something that's part of this bill?
What we have, it's very interesting. We have all of this money, but we don't just sit here on the state level and figure out how this is going to work. We don't know down in Columbus, every little project across the state. So what we've created are these small little commissions throughout the state, and they will be empowered to take those assets and actually decide on the local level how the money should be spent, because we believe that the local communities will know best on how those dollars should be spent. Now, there will be guidelines on how that's done and what it can be used for. And we have part of the program is actual money that's distributed. Then we also have a program where the local communities can access loans in addition to that too.
Now, the public actually has a say in this. This is a resolution, but it actually is something that has to go before the voters
Absolutely.
On the ballot.
Absolutely, and I feel strongly about that. As much as at stake here that the voters should decide. And what will happen, we're going to get this resolution passed. We should have it on the ballot here in May, and then the voters can vote for it. The bottom line is that it will not create any increase in taxes. We're going to spread this out over 10 years. With government funds, typically we can get a very low interest rate on our bonding. So it's going to be bonded, and we in the state of Ohio are going to pay that back over 10 years. So in most cases, the local government is not going to pay anything for it.
Now, you mentioned no taxes. The tax reform has been kind of a big issue around the State House this past year, a number of things going on there. You actually had a piece of legislation that you introduced last year related to a sales tax holiday. Tell us about that.
This is an exciting proposal, John, and this is one that I've introduced previously, and I think that the timing is right that we can get it done. We have looked at, from an economic development standpoint, things that other states have done. It's always good to take a look at what's going on out there. And what we have found is that there were several states that have been very successful with the notion of a sales tax holiday. So what happens is you give a break on certain items. Now, there are many different ways we can do this. At least the bill as drafted now would give a sales tax break on certain back-to-school items and computers, and computer accessories as such. And we have limits up to a certain amount depending on what the classification is. And the computers, for example, would be up to $750. So it's going to be the timing wise, it's going to be the first full weekend in August near back to school. Okay. So what we do here is, number one, we give a break to the taxpayers at back to school time. They get to save a little money. The other thing that we have found in other states is it creates a lot of economic activity. People are excited, almost a holiday-like atmosphere. They go to the stores, and oftentimes while they're there, they'll buy things in addition to the sales tax holiday items. So twofold. Number one, the taxpayer saves some money. Number two, our business owners out there get a nice spike in sales over that time period.
Well, we're now into 2014, and the legislature's coming back. There are a number of other initiatives that are kind of on the table. You have a couple of things that are coming up. One related to victims protection. Can you talk a little bit about that, Bill?
It's interesting, John. I used to, some years ago, I was a prosecutor and had the opportunity to deal a lot with victims and domestic violence situations. But what has been discovered is that the way our laws are written currently, if someone has a protection order against them, you have a situation where you have violence between a couple, oftentimes a protection order will be issued against one of them to keep that person away from the victim while the trial or while the charges are being figured out. So what we found is that we would have these individuals that were under protection order. The law required a specific process on how they're notified. They actually had to be personally presented with the protection order. And many of these individuals are very crafty and they know how to evade that or delay the process. In the meanwhile, even though they know the protection order is out there, they would go back and reoffend and harass or maybe commit a violent act against that individual. So right now, in a situation where that person knows of the protection order and they're willingly, just flagrantly violating it, even though they haven't been formally served, if they have actual knowledge of it, we can then prosecute them when they violate it. And that's what the bill seeks to do.
What are we talking about time frame here? Is there a standard? I mean, obviously people know how to evade, but what kind of a delay typically is there?
In getting the legislation passed?
Well, no, in actually getting the notification.
It just depends. I mean, if you have a situation where domestic violence is filed, charges filed, typically, the court will move right away to put a protection order in place if it's necessary. In some situations, it gets served right away, and some situations it never gets served because the person doesn't answer the phone when the police knock on the door, or they have other ways of avoiding service, or they move, things of that nature. So sometimes it never happens.
Gotcha. One other bill that you have that you're working on right now, which is frankly kind of near and dear to my heart because I had to pay the city of Columbus for one of these things, and that is red light cameras. I know that there's a bill in the House. You have one here in the Senate that's a little bit different, a little more restrictive, I guess, as opposed to the House bill, which is seeking to eliminate them altogether. Can you explain the difference?
What we found out, John, it's interesting, and I wasn't completely aware initially that we don't really have statewide standards for red light cameras. Very minimal requirements. I think our two requirements is that I believe we post signage, and the other is that you can't snap the picture more than 1 second after the amber switches to red, but very, very lax. Now here in Columbus, the city of Columbus has a very nice ordinance in place so that, for example, if you get a ticket, you have due process. That means you have a means of challenging it. In that they have more restrictions. You have to do a traffic study to be able to justify at an intersection why you're putting a camera up, things of that nature. Those standards don't exist statewide. And what we have found is it's almost like the wild, wild west with these red light cameras all over the state. So what we're going to do here is rein them in, make them follow a set of standards so that if someone does get a ticket, they have recourse. If a municipality wants to put a red light camera up at an intersection, they have to be able to establish that there's a need for it instead of just raising more revenue. I think it's worked quite well here locally, and what this would do, if passed, would extend that standard to the entire state. And we'll take a look at how that happens and see if we can curtail some of the abuses that we have heard are going on in other parts of the state.
State Senator Kevin Bacon, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for watching. As always, you can keep up to date with us every day on our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Ohio Senate GOP, or visit our website, ohiosenate.gov/Republicans.